Part 1. The idea. Everyone makes it sound simple. Buy a property, find a tenant, collect rent, retire early. You've seen the videos. The guys standing in front of houses talking about cash flow and passive income like it's something anyone can just stumble into on a Tuesday afternoon. And part of you believes it, because the math makes sense on paper. Someone else pays for your mortgage, the property appreciates, you build equity without doing anything. So you start researching, and that's when it gets complicated. Part 2. The research phase. You're 28. You've been investing in index funds for a few years. Your portfolio is sitting around $40,000. You have a stable job making $62,000 a year, and you've been living below your means long enough to have $25,000 in savings sitting in a high-yield account. You're not rich, but you're disciplined, and you've been reading about real estate for 6 months. You know what cap rate means, you know what cash-on-cash returns means, you know the difference between a single-family home and a multifamily property, and why some investors swear by one over the other. You've run the numbers on paper 100 times. A $220,000 property, 20% down, $44,000. Mortgage around $1,100 a month, rent in your market around $1,600. That's $500 a month, positive cash flow before expenses. It looks perfect on paper, but here's what nobody puts in their YouTube video. The paper is lying to you. Part 3. What the numbers don't tell you. Not because the math is wrong, but because the math is incomplete. That $500 cash flow doesn't account for vacancy. Every property sits empty sometimes. Industry standard is about 8% vacancy per year. That's roughly 1 month. So subtract $133 a month right off the top. It doesn't account for maintenance either. Real estate investors budget 1% of the property value per year for repairs. On a $220,000 home, that's $2,200 a year, $183 a month gone. It doesn't account for property management either if you ever decide you don't want to be the one answering calls at 11 p.m. about a broken water heater. That's typically 8 to 10% of monthly rent, another $140 to $160 a month. And it doesn't account for capital expenditures, the big ticket items, the roof that needs replacing in 7 years, the HVAC system, the water heater, the appliances. By the time you factor everything in, that $500 a month cash flow looks a lot more like $100, maybe less. You sit with that for a while, and then you make a decision that separates the people who actually build real estate wealth from the people who just talk about it. You decide to do it anyway. Part 4. The search. Finding the right property is nothing like buying your own home. When you bought or when you think about buying your own home, emotions play a role. You walk in and you feel something. Your picture, your furniture. You think about the neighborhood. Rental property is different. You're not buying a feeling. You're buying a business. So you get specific. You define your criteria before you ever set foot in the house. Price range, minimum rent to price ratio, neighborhood rental demand, school district ratings, not because you care about schools, but because your tenants will. Age of the roof, HVAC, water heater. You talk to a real estate agent who works with investors, not just any agent, someone who understands the numbers, not just the aesthetics. You look at 14 properties over 2 months. You run the numbers on each one. Most don't work. A few are close. One looks promising. It's a 3-bedroom, 1-bath, single-family home, built in 1987, asking $198,000. Needs some cosmetic work, paint, flooring, a bathroom update, but the estimated rent in the area is $1,550 a month. So you make an offer at $187,000. They counter at $193,000. You go back at $189,500. They accept. Part 5. The closing process. Here's where it gets real. You need 20% down for an investment property. That's $37,900, plus closing costs, which run about 2 to 5% of the purchase price, another $3,800 to $9,500. But you saved $25,000, so you're short. So you do what smart investors do. You get creative within reason. You pull $15,000 from your investment portfolio. Painful, but strategic. You negotiate with the seller to cover $3,000 in closing costs. You find a lender offering slightly better terms for the first-time investment property buyers. 6 weeks later, you're sitting at a closing table signing your name 47 times on documents that you've read 3 times each because you're that kind of person. And then someone hands you the keys, 2 keys, on a plain metal ring, and it hits you. You own a piece of real estate, not your home, an investment, an asset that will generate income. You drive to the property alone that evening. You walk through the empty rooms. You look at the scuffed walls and the dated flooring, and you feel equal parts terrified and proud. Part 6. The Tenant. Finding a good tenant is everything. This is not the place to cut corners. A bad tenant costs you more than a vacant property. Unpaid rent, property damage, eviction proceedings that can drag on for months depending on your state. The horror stories are real, so you screen seriously. You list the property on 2 rental platforms. You got 11 inquiries in the first week. You respond to all of them with a screening questionnaire. Income verification, rental history, employment status. You narrow it down to 4 applicants. You run background checks and credit checks on all 4, around $40 per applicant. You call their previous landlords. You ask specific questions. Did they pay on time? Did they give proper notice? Would you rent to them again? One applicant stands out. Stable job, clean credit, good rental history. They want to move in 3 weeks. So you sign a 12-month lease. You collect first month, last month, and a security deposit. And on the first of the following month, you get your first rent payment. $1,550 hits your account. You stare at it for longer than you'll admit. Part 7. The reality of being a landlord. Month 2 goes smoothly. Month 3, the tenant calls. The garbage disposal stopped working. You look up how to fix it on YouTube. Takes 20 minutes and costs $85 for a new one. Month 5, a small leak under the bathroom sink. You call a plumber. $220. Month 8, the tenant is 2 weeks late on rent. Your stomach tightens. You send a polite but firm reminder. The payment comes 3 days later with an apology. It never happens again. Month 11, the tenant tells you they're not renewing. They're moving out of state for a job. You have 30 days to find a new tenant. You list it again. This time, you get 7 inquiries. You find a qualified tenant in 19 days. There's an 11-day gap where the property sits vacant. You lose $570 in rent. But you also use those 11 days to repaint 2 rooms and replace the kitchen faucet. The property looks better than when you bought it. At the end of year 1, you sit down and do the math. Total rent collected, $17,050 after the vacancy gap. Mortgage payments, $13,200. Repairs and maintenance, $2,100. Property management, you self-managed, so $0. Insurance and property tax, $2,800. Net cash flow for the year, negative $1,050. You lost money in year 1. And here's the thing nobody tells you. That's actually normal, and it's still okay. Part 8. The bigger picture. Because cash flow is only one part of the equation. While you were losing $1,050 in cash flow, your tenant was paying down your mortgage. Every single month, a portion of that $1,100 payment went towards principal. Over the year, your loan balance dropped about $2,800. Your property also appreciated, conservatively, 3 to 4% in your market. On a $189,500 property, that's roughly $5,685 to $7,580 in equity gained. And you get a tax deduction, mortgage interest, property taxes, repairs, depreciation. Real estate has some of the most favorable tax treatment of any investment. Your accountant saves you $1,200 on your tax bill. So yes, negative $1,050 in cash flow, but positive $2,800 in mortgage paydown, plus $6,000 in appreciation, plus $1,200 in tax savings. Total return on your investment in year 1, roughly $8,950 on a $37,900 down payment. That's a 23% return on a year where you quote-unquote lost money. Part 9. What happens next? By year 3, the property is cash flow positive. Your rent is up to $1,650. Your mortgage payment hasn't changed. Your maintenance costs have stabilized because you've replaced the things that needed replacing. You're netting about $200 a month after all expenses. Not life-changing, but it's a system, and systems compound. By year 5, your property is appreciated to $225,000. You have $48,000 in equity. You do a cash-out refinance, pulling $30,000 out while keeping positive cash flow. That $30,000 becomes the down payment on your second rental property, and the machine gets bigger. Here's the truth about buying your first rental property. It's harder than the YouTube videos make it look. The numbers are messier. The process is longer. The first year will test your patience in ways you didn't expect. But it's also one of the most powerful wealth-building tools that regular people have access to. Not because it's passive, it isn't. Not really, not at first. But because it forces you to think like an investor, to make decisions based on data instead of emotion, to build something that outlasts your time and your effort. Your first property won't make you rich, but it'll teach you everything you need to know to buy the second one, and the third, and that's when it starts to get interesting. The only question is whether you're willing to get through the hard part to find out.